In this video, we're going to show how you can use Fusion 6's materials to mimic the anisotropic highlights that come off of a shiny metallic surface, like the face of a CD. So we're going to start with a blend tool, which we apply to our cylinder object, and we'll set the diffuse color to a nice golden tawny color. Then we're going to add a background tool. We'll set the image size to 512 by 512 pixels. We're going to make this perfectly gray, so 0.5 value. Now we add a filter, a directional blur, and an auto gain. The filter will be a noise on the red, green, and blue with strong power and not animated. The directional blur will be zoom with enough angle to give us those circular effects, and then we're going to use a auto gain to normalize that. We connect it to the diffuse input on our blend texture, and then we're going to take the specular intensity down to 0. So we're only creating the diffuse component of our material. Now we'll add a second blend, which we'll use to create the specular component. We'll set the diffuse to black because we don't need it. And now we'll create a bump map using a background tool, again set to 512 by 512. This time as a gradient set to angle. We'll set the start at 0.5 or midway through the image. And then we'll set the color of the start of the gradient to a nice purple. The end of the gradient will also set to the same color of purple. That will allow us to build a gradient that sweeps continuously throughout all of the color range in the red and the green. And the reason we're doing that is because for a bump map, we want to use the red and the green channels to represent the X and the Y normals. So we'll just set a couple of points on the gradient to give us a nice sweep. Then to modify or vary this gradient, we're going to put in a brightness contrast and a pseudo color, which we'll play with in a minute. The pseudo color tool can be found under Effect. That gets connected to a bump map tool, which again will use the red and green channels as a bump map. So change the mode to bump map mode, then connect that to the bump map input on the blend tool. Now at first we don't see anything, but we'll turn off the blue channel on the pseudo color, and then we'll adjust the contrast on the brightness contrast and the frequency and phase for the red and green components of the pseudo color. And that's making a non-uniform adjustment to the gradient so that we start to have bits of the image which pop up, or bits of the geometry which pop up according to the lighting model. When we adjust the specular intensity and exponent on our blend, we can see how that bump map is affecting the way the specular highlights hit the object. Now we want those specular highlights to be modified by those grooves we created earlier. So we branch those grooves out to a brightness contrast, really increase the contrast on them, use a channel boolean to copy the red to the alpha channel, and then connect that to the specular exponent input on our blend tool. Now let's just put a little bit of tinting on the specular color to match that golden shade that we created earlier. Now what we need to do is combine the diffuse and the specular blend tools. So we use a channel boolean material, and we set the operation on those to A plus B, or an additive operation. But just for the red, green, and blue channel, we'll leave the alpha alone. And now you can see, just by adjusting a couple of simple parameters, such as the frequency and phase on the pseudo color and the contrast or the brightness contrast, we're going to end up with a really nice looking set of anisotropic highlights.